Charles Dickens writes many novels revolving around the theme of the evil of industrial revolution, about social class, childhood innocence and loss of innocence as his characters grow into adulthood. This novel, Great Expectation, is a story that revolves around these themes. The protagonist and the narrator of this novel is Philip Perup, also called Pip. Great Expectations cover his stories from childhood till adulthood. As an innocent child, Pip grew in Kent. He never knew his parents, except that his parents were dead and their names were Philip and Georgiana Perup. His name was also Philip, but since he could not pronounce it as a child, he simply shortened it as Pip. While Pip was crying in front of his parents' grave in a churchyard on Christmas Eve, a convict who had escaped from prison, whose name was Magwitch, caught him and threatened him to stop his crying noise or he would cut his throat. But on hearing that Pip was an orphan and he lived with his sister and her husband, who was a blacksmith, he sent Pip to bring a file and food the next morning. Pip ran home only to be scolded by his ill-tempered sister, Mrs. Joe. But Joe, his brother-in-law, protected him. Mr. Joe was a kind-hearted blacksmith who loved Pip like a friend and a brother. The next morning, Pip stole a file from Joe's tools and a pork pie that his sister had made for the Christmas feast and went to meet the convict Magwitch. But on his way, he met another convict who had escaped from prison, and his name was Compeyson. The other convict was also dressed in the same dress as Magwitch, so at first he was confused. They both had the same ankle iron around their ankle, but the man fled into the marshes when Pip tried to talk to him. On finding Magwitch, Pip told him about the other person dressed just like him, and Magwitch became very angry. Everyone in the area was made aware by the police that the two criminal convicts had escaped prison. The next day was Christmas, and Mrs. Joe had arranged a party and invited Uncle Pumblechook and other guests at her home. But in the middle of the party, the policemen came to meet Joe the blacksmith to fix their handcuffs because they said that they had found the whereabouts of the two convicts and were about to catch them. Joe and Pip followed them, and the two convicts were found fighting in the marshes. The first convict, Magwitch, turned and saw Pip, and he confessed that I had also stolen a file and a pork pie from a nearby house. After that incident, Charles Dickens goes on to talk about another woman who lived in Kent, a very rich woman who was called Miss Havisham, who was a grim old lady living in a big neglected house called the Satis house. Since Miss Havisham was a very rich lady, someone tricked her, saying that he would marry her. It was said about Miss Havisham that someone wanted to marry Miss Havisham, and they got engaged, and during their engagement that man took away a lot of Miss Havisham's money and left her on the marriage day while she was getting ready at 20 minutes to 9. She was left broken. She was so heartbroken that she shunned all the windows of the house and never saw sunlight again. She kept all the wedding decorations as it is, and she never took off her wedding dress, and she stopped all the clock at 20 minutes to 9 and left everything in the house untouched and uncleaned. Everything was kept as it is, even the wedding cake. Miss Havisham later on went on to adopt a little girl and called her Estella. Now, the main motive behind adopting Estella by Miss Havisham was to train her to become a cold-hearted girl so that she would grow up to break man's heart, just like man broke Miss Havisham's heart. One day, Miss Havisham asked Mr. Pumblechook, who was Joe's uncle and a tenant in her house, she told him to go and find a boy about Estella's age to come and play with her. So he brought Pip. Miss Havisham watched Pip and Estella playing cards in front of her and enjoyed Estella making fun of Pip and passing insulting remarks at him, at his appearance and at his attitude. Pip felt humiliated, but also began to feel a liking for Estella. Pip continued to visit Miss Havisham and Estella for 8 months. Finally, Miss Havisham told Pip after 8 months never to come back to the Satis house and gave him a certain amount of money. Now Pip, all these years he had wanted nothing but to become a good old blacksmith just like Joe. But after visiting Miss Havisham and Estella, he wanted to become more than just a simple man. He wanted more than just a simple life. He wanted to be rich, he wanted to become a respectable gentleman, and he wanted to be fit to marry Estella. As he continued helping Joe in the forge, he could imagine Estella laughing at him and insulting his condition of being a blacksmith. He went to visit Miss Havisham and Estella after a year, only to be told by Miss Havisham that Estella had gone abroad to become an educated lady and that she had grown to be prettier than everybody, and everyone who looked at Estella admired her. And then she asked Pip if he felt like he had lost Estella forever and began to laugh hysterically. Pip always returned from the Satis house feeling mocked at and feeling not good enough and humiliated, but his attraction towards Estella keeps leading him to the Satis house. On his return from the Satis house, his sister Mrs. Joe was found severely injured on the head and bleeding profusely. Both Pip and Joe knew that Mrs. Joe had a lot of enemies in the village and anyone would have hurt her. Mrs. Joe had a lot of enemies because of her sharp tongue and quick temper. Mrs. Joe was alive, but she lost her power of speech and memory ever since. However, she became more patient and quiet and sat near the fire just like an old cat. Biddy is another character who is an orphan girl in the village and who came to help Mrs. Joe and do the household chores. She was clever and smart, gentle and kind, and kept everyone in the house comfortable. Pip shared about his dreams and about his ambition to Biddy. He told Biddy about how he loved Estella and his plan to marry Estella. One day when Pip and Joe were working in the forge, Mr. Jaggers, another character, comes looking for them. Pip quickly recognized that he had seen this face somewhere, and it was none other than Mr. Jaggers from the Satis house. Mr. Jaggers said that he was a lawyer in London. He tells Pip that someone in the future wants to provide Pip with great expectations, wants to provide him with great inheritance of wealth. But first of all, that person who will later on become his benefactor wanted him to become an educated gentleman, to be able to use the property and money wisely. He also told Pip that the identity of his benefactor would remain a secret until his benefactor himself wanted to reveal his or her identity, and that he should always go by the name Pip. He should always use the name Pip. Mr. Jaggers then gave him a handsome amount of money to get some decent clothes, to go to London. Pip believed in his heart that it must be Miss Havisham, his secret benefactor. Pip also thought that maybe Miss Havisham wanted to make him a gentleman, to make him fit for marriage to Estella. Pip was excited because all he wanted was to become a gentleman, an educated gentleman, and live a respectable life like Miss Havisham and Estella. So he hurried to the village tailor, Mr. Trabb, but Mr. Trabb pretended to be very busy. He was ignoring Pip. But when Pip told Mr. Trabb that he was going to become very rich and he had a lot of money, his attitude totally changed. Mr. Trabb became more respectful towards him. This was Pip's first experience with the enormous power of money. Pip reached London and lived with Herbert Pocket, and they became fast friends. Pip was supposed to study under Herbert's father, And Herbert's father had other two students along with Pip. The two students were Bentley Drummle and Startup. Startup was quite a good gentleman, a kind man, but Bentley Drummle was rude and snobbish and proud and arrogant. After Pip and Herbert started living together and living a highly fashionable lifestyle, Mr. Joe, the blacksmith, the old friend, came to visit Pip. But Pip was not very happy because, Joe was a lowly blacksmith. What would his friends think about him, especially Bentley Drummle? What if he saw a blacksmith, Joe, a villager, coming to meet Pip? Joe, of course, felt very happy to see Pip, but also felt awkward and uncomfortable with the way Pip was acting towards him. Pip was acting towards him like a stranger, in a cold way. After Joe left, Pip felt sorry and ashamed of how he had treated Joe. Soon news came that Estella was coming to London, and Pip was clearly in love and overjoyed, but Herbert warned Pip about Estella's upbringing under Miss Havisham and that she was incapable of loving. And exactly as Herbert had said, Estella would call Pip to escort her to parties and shopping and balls, and would keep ordering him around like a secretary or like a brother, scolding him and warning him in an insulting way. Miss Havisham wanted to meet Estella, so Estella calls Pip saying that let's go meet Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham continually asked about how many hearts Estella had broken, how she ignored men, how men loved her, but she coldly broke their hearts. She had a witch-like eagerness as she looked at Estella. But when she tried to touch Estella's hand, Estella coldly brushed away her hand. Miss Havisham felt hurt and called Estella a stone and cold heart. Estella replied that Miss Havisham had trained her to be that way and she had learned her lessons well. But Miss Havisham pleaded, saying that I told you to break man's heart. I told you to be cold towards men, not towards me. You should love me. Miss Havisham had a taste of her own medicine. She reaped what she had sown. One night, an old man of around 60 years of age came to visit Pip. Pip, after some time, recognized that it was the convict whom he had helped years back when he was 7 years old in the churchyard. His name was Abel Magwitch. Magwitch also revealed that he was Pip's secret benefactor. Now, Abel Magwitch and Compeyson were business partners, but Compeyson betrayed Magwitch and sent him to prison and went on to trick Miss Havisham and took her money after the engagement and left her on their marriage day. He was already married and had a wife. Compeyson was the reason why Miss Havisham hated all men, and she adopted Magwitch and Molly's daughter and called her Estella. Taught her to be cold and rude and never fall in love, but break men's hearts. Magwitch's wife Molly, on the other hand, killed another woman because she thought that her husband Magwitch was in love with that woman. She even threatened Magwitch that she would even kill their child. Magwitch was in prison, and so the lawyer, Mr. Jaggers, gave away the child to Miss Havisham for adoption. After Mr. Jaggers gave Magwitch and Molly's child to Miss Havisham, Magwitch always thought that his daughter was dead. Mr. Jaggers also got Magwitch out of jail under the condition that he would be sent to New South Wales in Australia and never step foot on England. While in South Wales, Magwitch became a sheep farmer. He worked to earn enough money to make Pip a gentleman. All the years that he had been working in New South Wales, he never forgot the kind gesture that Pip had shown him. But back here in London, Pip grew up believing that Miss Havisham was his silent benefactor and that she was doing so to make him fit to marry Estella. Pip had this great expectation that Miss Havisham was his benefactor. great expectation that he would one day marry Estella. And without knowing where the money was coming from, Pip spent the money lavishly, became spendthrift, and also in a lot of debt. On learning that Magwitch was his benefactor, he was disappointed because firstly, Magwitch was a criminal. Secondly, that Miss Havisham would want him to marry Estella was all in his imagination. On the other hand, Estella came to Pip, informing him that she was going to marry Mr. Drummle. Yes, the very Bentley Drummle who was rude, cold, and snobbish and thinks that he's better than everybody else. Pip tried to warn her, of course, against her decision, but in vain. Then he goes to Miss Havisham to ask for loan for Magwitch's escape, as well as to make sure that she was not the benefactor, and she confirmed that she was not his benefactor. And Miss Havisham gave him the amount of money that Pip needed. Magwitch had to escape because, the authority was looking for him and his visit in England was illegal. By this time, Miss Havisham looked broken and weak. She also asked Pip to forgive her for the pain that she caused Estella to inflict on him. Miss Havisham was full of hatred for men just because Compeyson had betrayed her. She hated the whole man gender. But now in her own heart, after facing the same rejection and hatred from Estella, whom she invested so much love and care upon, she tasted her own medicine, she realized her mistake, and she asked forgiveness from Pip. When Pip was leaving the Satis house, Miss Havisham's dress caught fire and she started screaming. On hearing her screaming, Pip came and tried to rescue Miss Havisham, and in the process burned his own hands. But with her last strength, she told Pip to tell Estella that she had forgiven Estella. In the meantime, the authority was hearing rumors that Magwitch was back in London, so they brought a boat and hurriedly tried for Magwitch's escape. But while they were rowing away, another boat came and the soldiers there stopped them and asked Magwitch to surrender. When the boats got closer, Magwitch jumped upon another man on the other boat, who turned out to be Compeyson. And then they both fell into the water, drowning Compeyson and severely injuring Magwitch. Magwitch and all his wealth was to be surrendered to the custody of the government. All the money that Magwitch earned and which he was supposed to give to Pip was to be taken away by the government. All his great expectations were to be surrendered to the government. Yes, now Pip was not going to get any money from his benefactor Magwitch, but he was kind to Magwitch till his death. He kept visiting Magwitch in the prison, and while he was on his deathbed, while Magwitch was about to die, Pip told him that his daughter was alive, Molly never killed her, that she was very pretty, and that he was in love with her. This brought peace to Magwitch, and he kissed Pip's hands and died. With the help of Pip, Herbert had found a good job in clericers, but Pip himself was in heavy debt. He was also becoming ill. One day he became sick and unconscious. When he regained his senses, he found Joe taking care of him. Pip began to cry regretfully, saying that Joe should be angry at him for betraying their friendship. When Pip was better, Joe left with a goodbye note and his debts paid. Pip became more humble and grounded and decided to marry BD and to lead a simple, happy life. But turns out Joe and BD got married. So he went away to Egypt to work with the clericers and company and continued to live with Herbert and his beloved wife Clara for 11 years. After 11 years, he returned to Kent to visit Joe and BD. They had a son whom they called Pip. He went to visit the Satis house. It was all burnt down, and as he was walking about, he met Estella, who had also come as a last visit to the Satis house. But she had greatly changed now. It was 11 years since they last saw each other. Bentley Drummle was an abusive husband, and so she left him. After their divorce, Bentley Drummle was killed in an accident. Estella's youthful freshness was gone, but she still had that majestic charm of her beauty. Her proud eyes were now changed into a soft and sad look. She spoke of her regrets of throwing away Pepys' love. But then they reassured their friendship as they walked away from Miss Havisham's Satis house, holding hands and leaving the past memories behind. And the novel ends there. There was a short summary of Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.